Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing beneath the soot-black rafters of a medieval great hall, where the last heavy platters of supper are being carried away, and the warmth of the fire presses softly against one side of your face while cold stone breathes against the other. Damp rushes crunch beneath your boots. Smoke hangs in slow layers near the beams. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, a monastery bell sounds across the dark fields, faint through river mist and winter air. Your cloak still carries the smell of wet wool, your boots are streaked with courtyard mud, and through an open doorway you catch the white breath of horses waiting beneath torchlight. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here without complaining about the cold, the food, the bedding, or the suspicious number of things crawling through the straw. But for tonight, at least, you have a place near the fire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The feast is ending, although no one announces it. There is no sudden scraping of chairs, no cheerful command that dinner is officially finished. Instead, the great hall changes slowly around you. A servant removes a silver dish from the Lord's table. Another gathers the remains of coarse bread and broken trenchers, those thick slabs of yesterday's loaf that have spent the evening catching gravy, grease, and dripping sauce beneath roasted meat. Some may later be given to servants or the poor. Others may go to the dogs waiting with astonishing patience beneath the benches. One hound has been staring at the same piece of beef for so long that you begin to suspect he understands property law. You stand near the lower end of the hall, watching the careful rhythm of clearing. This is not merely cleaning. Everything here reflects rank. The Lord and his closest guests sit upon the raised dais beneath a hanging cloth worked with faded hunting scenes. Their cups are finer, their knives are better, their seats are warmer because they stand nearer the great hearth. Further down the tables, lesser household members receive simpler vessels and fewer choices. Even after dinner, nobody quite forgets where everyone belongs. Servants approach with basins and ewers. Warm water is poured over noble hands, sometimes scented lightly with herbs. Towels are offered, fingers that have torn bread, lifted meat, and handled knives throughout the meal are carefully washed. You might imagine medieval nobles simply wiping greasy hands on the nearest dog, tapestry, or unfortunate servant. But table manners among the wealthy can be surprisingly elaborate. Hand-washing before and after meals carries practical value, certainly, yet it also signals refinement. A person who knows when to wash, where to sit, how to use a knife, and which dish to touch first is displaying education. A person who does none of those things is displaying something else. You decide not to experiment. At the high table, a cupbearer quietly checks the Lord's drinking vessel before it's refilled. Fear of poisoning is not constant, but it never entirely disappears from noble life. Certain expensive stones, strange animal horns, or specially crafted cups are sometimes believed to reveal or resist poison. Some swear that a unicorn horn, usually something considerably less magical sold under a better name, can protect a drinker from hidden danger. No one can quite agree whether anyone truly trusts such objects, but wealthy households still pay impressive sums for reassurance. You watch a polished object near the Lord's place being handled with solemn care. It might be protective. It might be decorative. It might simply be very expensive, which in noble circles occasionally amounts to the same thing. The remaining dishes are carried through a side passage toward kitchens far hotter and louder than the hall. You glimpse cooks working in red firelight, scraping pots and separating leftovers. Bones may be boiled again. Meat can reappear in another preparation. Bread can thicken pottage. Nothing useful is casually wasted in a household that must feed scores of mouths every day. Beyond the kitchen walls lie winter storehouses holding sacks of grain, salted meat, dried peas, smoked fish, onions, apples, ale barrels, and precious spices locked away from casual fingers. A castle feast looks lavish because enormous labour hides behind it. Tonight's noble guests see decorated platters. Someone else has spent the day carrying wood. You move closer to the hearth as benches are shifted. The formal shape of dinner begins loosening. Long tables may be dismantled or moved aside depending on the household and occasion. Trestles are lifted. Boards disappear toward the walls. The great hall is not a room with one purpose. It is dining chamber, reception space, workplace, courtroom, sleeping place for some servants, and stage for evening entertainment. By daylight, petitions may be heard here. At supper, venison is served here. Later, someone may snore here loudly enough to alarm the saints. Fresh logs settle into the fire with a soft shower of sparks. Beeswax candles burn near the high table, giving off a sweeter scent than cheaper tallow lights. Beeswax is valuable, and its clean flame suits noble rooms and sacred spaces. Down near the servants, poorer lights smoke more heavily. The difference between wealth and ordinary life can sometimes be measured by how unpleasantly your candle smells. You notice servants pulling aside the dirtiest rushes from the floor. Rushes help soften cold stone, absorb spills, and make a vast hall slightly less echoing beneath boots. Herbs may sometimes be scattered among them for fragrance. Yet if they remain too long, they collect dust, crumbs, fleas, damp, and all the tiny evidence of daily life. The floor beneath your feet smells of straw, smoke, spilled ale, roasted meat, wet leather, and crushed rosemary. Strangely enough, after a while, you stop noticing. Outside, another bell travels across the dark. Time here is not ruled by glowing numbers. It arrives through sound. Bells mark prayers, work, worship, danger, and the passing hours. A distant abbey can shape the rhythm of people who never enter its gates. The noble household hears that rhythm too. Dinner is finished, but the night is young by castle standards. No one is heading straight to bed. Instead, people begin rearranging themselves according to friendship, rank, duty, and appetite. Some move nearer the fire. Some remain standing beneath the wall hangings. A few servants bring fresh cups. Others clear the last dishes. The lord leans back in his chair, no longer eating but not yet withdrawing. Conversation becomes softer. Shoulders relax. A fur-lined cloak appears around an elderly guest who has been pretending not to feel cold for at least half an hour. Near the doorway, the same patient dog finally receives a scrap from beneath the table. Justice, apparently, has been served. You warm your hands above the hearth and look along the hall as its evening life begins to take another form. From somewhere beyond an oak door comes the faint sound of a string being tested, then another, followed by the soft, uncertain note of a harp being tuned. The tables are nearly clear now. The candles have been trimmed. The feast has ended, and beneath the smoky rafters, the real after-dinner hours are only beginning. The first clear notes of the harp reach you before you see the musician. They drift through the oak doorway in a loose little pattern, hesitant at first, then smoother, as though someone in the adjoining passage is persuading cold strings to remember their proper voices. Around you, the great hall responds almost without noticing. A few heads turn. A servant pauses with a stack of wooden cups. The elderly guest beneath his fur-lined cloak shifts closer to the hearth, apparently deciding that music is a perfectly acceptable reason not to surrender his warm seat. You remain where the fire reaches your hands. The last boards from the lower tables are carried aside, leaving open stretches of rush-covered floor. Shadows broaden across the stone. Beeswax candles stand in iron branches near the dais, while cheaper lights further down the hall produce more smoke than illumination. The air grows calmer now that platters no longer travel constantly between kitchen and table. Then the musicians enter. There are only 3 of them tonight. One carries a small harp against his shoulder. Another holds a bowed instrument with a narrow body, the sort of fiddle that can fill a stone chamber surprisingly well. The third has a compact drum hanging at his side, though for now he keeps his hands away from it. Their clothes are respectable but travel-worn russet wool, faded green, a hood patched near one shoulder. Mud has dried along the hem of one cloak. They bow toward the Lord. No one applauds. That habit belongs to another age and another sort of room. Approval here arrives differently: attention, permission to continue, perhaps a cup of ale afterward, perhaps a coin, perhaps an invitation to remain beneath a roof instead of returning to a road where frost is already whitening the cart ruts. The harpist begins. The melody is quiet enough that conversations do not vanish completely. Instead, music slips between them. You hear fragments around the hall. A knight murmurs about a hawk that refuses to return properly to the glove. 2 women near the wall discuss a piece of dyed cloth brought from a distant market. An older steward quietly corrects a servant who has placed a cup where it should not be. Music after dinner does not always mean a grand performance demanding silence. Often it is part of the room itself. A noble household enjoys being entertained, certainly, but entertainment also displays status. To feed musicians, welcome travelling performers, maintain instruments, or keep skilled household players suggest wealth and cultivated taste. And, perhaps more importantly, it prevents 40 well-fed people from spending the entire evening discussing drainage ditches. The fiddle joins the harp. Its tone is rougher, warmer, almost human. You watch one of the younger nobles tap 2 fingers against his knee. Songs may celebrate courtly love, brave warriors, saints, distant battles, or adventures so improved by repetition that truth has long since packed its bag and gone elsewhere. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how much audiences believe. A famous hero may become taller with every performance. A journey of 3 days can eventually require 7 years. A reasonably troublesome boar can, given enough winter evenings, grow into a beast capable of defeating entire counties. Nobody seems eager to correct the details. Accuracy is useful. A good story is warmer. Near the dais, a young woman bends over a small embroidery frame while listening. Her needle catches candlelight as she works coloured thread through linen. Evening needlework is practical, but among noble women, fine embroidery can also demonstrate patience, skill, education, and household refinement. Beside her lies a small pair of scissors and a little pincushion. She never once looks down long enough for you to understand how she avoids sewing her own sleeve into the design. You decide this is probably one of the lost arts of civilization. The musician changes tune. This one is livelier. A servant brings ale for several guests, and you receive a cup warm from another hand. It tastes slightly sour, slightly smoky, and far weaker than many modern imaginations would prefer medieval drink to be. Ale belongs comfortably in evening life, though quantities vary enormously by household occasion and individual. Not everyone is staggering through the castle after supper. Most people have responsibilities waiting tomorrow morning, and medieval dawn has very little sympathy for a headache. Near the hearth, a grey-haired nobleman carries a small charm sewn into a leather pouch at his belt. You noticed it during dinner, but now the firelight reveals a tiny metal badge attached beside it, perhaps acquired from a pilgrimage shrine. Pilgrim badges are common souvenirs of sacred journeys, often stamped from inexpensive metal and worn on hats, cloaks, or bags. Some are kept for devotion, memory, protection, or simply because returning from a famous shrine without anything to show for it feels like poor planning. Some swear that certain badges, relics, or blessed tokens offer protection during travel, illness, storms, or unlucky nights. Even now, it is hard to tell whether every owner believes such promises completely. A person can be devout and practical at the same time. A blessed token may guard the soul. A sharp knife may guard the purse. Most travellers are quite happy to carry both. The drum finally joins. Not loudly, just a soft pulse beneath the strings. A pair of younger courtiers cross the open floor, not quite dancing at first, merely stepping in time. Then others notice. Smiles appear. One of the women sets aside her embroidery. There are formal dances for particular occasions and social settings, and there are simpler moments when movement follows music because everyone has eaten well. The hall is warm, and the roads outside are dark. You remain near the wall. This seems wise. Medieval dancing requires remembering both your feet and your social rank, and you currently trust neither. A nobleman offers his hand to a lady. They join the others. Their movements are measured rather than wild small turns, careful steps, controlled gestures suited to clothing that is expensive, layered, and inconvenient to fall over. Clothing itself tells stories here. Long gowns, fitted sleeves, belts, fur trim, carefully chosen colours, and fine cloth reveal position. Sumptuary expectations and local customs sometimes influence what different ranks are supposed to wear, though enforcement can be inconsistent. No one can quite agree whether the rules discourage extravagance or merely encourage everyone to become more creative about looking extravagant. The musicians continue. Behind them, servants slip quietly through the room, carrying away cups, adjusting logs, trimming wicks, and preparing for whatever comes after the entertainment. Noble leisure is always supported by somebody else's tired feet. You notice one young page attempting to suppress a yawn while holding a jug. He fails magnificently. Fortunately, the Lord is watching the dancers. The song ends. People return to benches and hearthside stools. A few coins may later reach the musicians, or food, lodging, clothing, patronage, introductions, anything valuable enough to make the next journey easier. The harpist rests his fingers. Conversation returns more clearly now, strengthened by music rather than interrupted by it. And as you listen, you realize that these after-dinner hours are not empty time at all. They are where reputations soften or sharpen, where people observe one another, where friendships grow, where news travels, and where a noble court quietly performs itself beneath smoke and candlelight. Then a servant places a carved board near the hearth. Small pieces follow. Across from it, someone produces dice. The evening is changing again. The carved board settles onto a low table close to the hearth, where firelight moves across its dark and pale squares. You drift nearer with the others. The musicians have not vanished completely. The harpist remains beside the wall, quietly adjusting a string while accepting a cup of ale. The fiddler speaks with the servant near the doorway, yet the hall no longer belongs to music. attention gathers instead around polished wooden pieces, bone dice, small counters, and the quiet competitive energy that arrives whenever comfortable people discover a way to prove that they are cleverer than one another. A nobleman takes one side of the board. Across from him sits an older woman in a dark blue gown edged with fur. Between them waits a chess set. The pieces are not identical to the ones you would recognize immediately from a modern board, and their shapes vary greatly depending on where and when they're made. Some are simple, others are carved into kings, mounted knights, bishops, towers, and attendants. Fine sets can be made from ivory, bone, antler, wood, or other valuable materials. This one appears expensive. Naturally, everyone pretends not to care who wins. Naturally, everyone cares. The first pieces move. Chess has reached medieval Europe through long chains of cultural exchange, changing as it travels. Among nobles, it becomes especially suitable for the evening because it combines leisure with an agreeable suggestion of intelligence. A person can sit beside the fire, drink something warm, move tiny armies across a board, and still feel that the evening has been intellectually productive. This may be humanity's oldest excuse for avoiding actual work. You crouch near the edge of the group. The woman moves one piece. The nobleman studies the board much longer than seems necessary. Someone behind you whispers that he is already in trouble. The player hears. He studies the board even longer. Elsewhere in the hall, another game begins. This one uses a board divided for counters, the family of games often called tables, ancestors and relatives of later backgammon. Small pieces travel according to throws of dice, bringing chance into a contest that also rewards judgment. The clatter of bone dice against wood is sharper than the harp. 3 men lean over the board. A silver coin lies near one elbow. Gaming for money can draw suspicion from moralists and household authorities, particularly when stakes rise or players neglect duties. Rules against gambling appear repeatedly in medieval communities, precisely because telling people not to gamble has rarely achieved the remarkable result governments hope for. No one can quite agree whether tonight's little coin represents serious wagering or merely pride given a convenient physical shape. The dice roll. One man groans softly. The coin moves. Apparently pride has changed owners. You warm your hands again. The fire has burned lower since the feast, and servants add split logs carefully rather than rebuilding the roaring blaze of dinner. Wood is valuable. Even a noble household does not feed flames carelessly throughout every winter night. Near the wall, bundles of rushlights wait beside better candles. A rushlight can be made from the peeled pith of a rush dipped in fat, producing a cheap but modest source of illumination. It burns nothing like a proud beeswax candle, but it is useful in humbler corners of a household where nobody requires the night to smell particularly elegant. A servant pinches away a blackened candle wick. The flame steadies. Across the hall, laughter rises. Dice again. You wander toward it. A young knight holds 2 small cubes in his palm as though consulting mysterious advisors. Medieval dice may be made from bone, antler, wood, or other materials. They are familiar enough to appear everywhere, from taverns to military camps and aristocratic halls. They also attract superstition. Some swear that certain throws become lucky after particular gestures, prayers, touches, or muttered formulas. Others mistrust dice that seem unusually fortunate in one person's hands. Loaded or altered dice are not unknown either. Suspicion, apparently, is part of the entertainment. One player rubs the dice briefly between his palms before throwing. Another immediately complains that the gesture is unfair. The first responds with the expression of a man who has absolutely no idea what anyone could possibly mean. You begin to appreciate that medieval gambling requires fewer written rules and elaborate facial expressions. Not all evening games involve boards. Near the dais, several guests trade riddles. One describes something indirectly, offering clues while listeners attempt to identify the answer. Riddles belong comfortably within oral culture, appearing in manuscripts but also living in halls, workshops, monasteries, and gatherings where people entertain one another without requiring instruments or elaborate equipment. Tonight's riddle appears to involve something with a mouth that does not eat. Suggestions pass around. A river, a bell, a jug. Someone offers a particularly complicated answer involving a dragon. Nobody accepts it. There is always one person. You remain silent, partly because you do not know the answer, and partly because being mysteriously thoughtful is safer than being publicly wrong. The grey-haired nobleman with the pilgrim badge joins the group. He carries his leather charm pouch still, and while waiting for another riddle he touches it with 2 fingers almost absent-mindedly. Small protective habits can become deeply embedded in daily life. A person may carry written prayers, blessed objects, relic fragments, herbs, crosses, stones, or tokens thought to defend against illness, misfortune, nightmares, or worse. Some practices rest comfortably beside approved religion. Others drift into areas clergy may regard with suspicion. Even now, it is hard to tell whether an owner always distinguishes carefully between devotion, custom, and superstition. If an object has supposedly protected 3 generations of your family, you're unlikely to throw it into the fire because a scholar disapproves. The riddle is finally solved. The answer is a river. The dragon's porter looks disappointed. At the chessboard, the older woman makes another move. Silence follows. The nobleman across from her stares. Then someone quietly laughs. His king is trapped. There is no great celebration. The woman simply leans back while a servant brings her a small cup. Her opponent rearranges one sleeve and announces, through posture alone, that the entire game was probably beneath him anyway. A dog stretches near your boots. It is the same patient hound from dinner, now apparently promoted from beef inspector to gaming observer. Its eyes follow one rolling die. For a dangerous moment you imagine it pouncing. It does not. Perhaps noble dogs understand etiquette better than you do. The evening grows deeper. Games continue in small islands of candlelight. Some are strategic, some dependent on luck, some built entirely from words and memory. They pass time, certainly, but they also reveal temperament. Who grows angry when losing? Who cheats? Who notices? Who pretends not to notice? Who laughs too loudly at a lord's weak joke? Who quietly defeats him at chess? The hall watches all of it. After dinner, when formal ceremony loosens, people become easier to read. A servant gathers empty cups. The musicians begin packing their instruments. Outside, wind brushes the shutters. And as another log collapses softly into embers, one of the older guests begins telling a story about a hunter who once followed a white stag into a forest and returned 3 days later convinced that he had been gone for only an hour. The dice stop rolling. Heads turn. The board pieces remain where they are. The hall is ready for stories. The story begins with a white stag. No one moves much as the older guest settles deeper into his chair beside the hearth. The chess pieces remain abandoned in their final positions, the defeated king still cornered on the board, dice lie forgotten beside a silver coin. Even the dog near your boots lifts its head as though it has heard this tale before, and intends to check whether the man gets the important parts right this time. The speaker takes his time. That is part of the pleasure. Outside, winter wind presses softly against the shutters. Inside, the fire has settled into a red bed of coals beneath two blackened logs. Beeswax candles flicker along the dais, their light catching on iron buckles, fur trim, polished cups, and the tiny pilgrim badge at the grey-haired nobleman's belt. The hunter in the tale, you learn, had been riding alone at dusk when the white stag appeared between the trees. Not merely pale, white as fresh linen, white as frost under moonlight. White enough, apparently, that every sensible person listening immediately understands he should not follow it. Naturally, he follows it. Medieval stories are remarkably efficient at punishing curiosity, while also depending entirely upon curiosity to exist. You draw your wool cloak closer. The stag leads the hunter away from the road and into a forest where ordinary tracks disappear beneath fern and leaf mould. He hears no birds. His horse begins to sweat despite the cold. Then bells sound somewhere ahead, though no church stands within miles. At this, several listeners exchange glances. Bells where no bell should be are rarely encouraging. Some swear that strange music, impossible lights, mysterious animals, or voices heard in lonely places can signal encounters with the supernatural. Forests especially gather stories because they sit beyond the ordered boundaries of village fields and manor roads. They shelter outlaws, wolves, hermits, charcoal burners, travellers, and enough ordinary dangers that imagination hardly needs much assistance. No one can quite agree whether the hunter's white stag is meant to be a heavenly sign, a dangerous spirit, or simply an unusually memorable deer improved by 30 years of storytelling. The older guest continues as though this distinction is unimportant. The hunter reaches a clearing. There he finds a small chapel illuminated from within. The door stands open. Inside sits a priest who offers him bread and warm wine. The hunter rests for what feels like an hour. When he rides home, however, 3 full days have passed. A servant near the wall quietly crosses himself. You notice. So does everyone else. No one laughs at him. Stories such as this live in the uncertain space between entertainment, warning, devotion, and belief. Time behaves strangely in tales of enchanted places. Travellers lose hours or years. Saints appear in dreams. Dead relatives offer warnings. Mysterious strangers vanish after receiving charity. A lonely road becomes the border between the familiar world and something much older. The nobleman finishes. For a moment, only the fire speaks. Then another voice begins. A lady seated beneath a faded wall hanging offers a tale about a knight who promises to return to his beloved after pilgrimage. This story is different. There is no white stag. There is, however, an astonishing amount of waiting. The knight travels across difficult roads, sleeps in monastery guest houses, crosses rivers by unreliable ferry, pays market tolls, loses a horse, buys another horse, and eventually reaches a shrine where he acquires a pilgrim badge similar to the one worn by the grey-haired guest. You recognize the shape when she describes it. Perhaps that is why he smiles. Pilgrimage stories fit comfortably into noble evenings because pilgrimage itself belongs to medieval life across many ranks. People travel to shrines seeking forgiveness, healing, fulfillment of vows, or proximity to saints and relics believed to possess sacred power. The journey can also become adventure, hardship, social experience, and story material. A returned pilgrim has seen roads others have not. That alone makes him useful after dinner. The lady's knight finally returns home, His beloved has remained faithful. Of course she has. This is a courtly tale. Reality has been asked to wait outside. The listeners approve. Then comes a story of St. Christopher carrying a mysterious child across dangerous water, followed by a local account concerning a church bell supposedly found beneath a hill after a shepherd dreamed where to dig. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such local legends are repeated because people believe them literally, because they honour a place, or simply because every village prefers its own miracle to someone else's. A younger noble adds that a spring near his family estate cures weak eyes if visited before sunrise on a particular saint's day. The steward raises one eyebrow. Apparently he has heard this claim before. The young man insists that his aunt knew someone who knew a woman who recovered after washing there. This chain of evidence is received with the solemn respect it deserves, which is to say, almost none. Still, nobody dismisses the spring entirely. Holy wells, healing fountains, saintly relics, herbs, prayers, charms, and folk cures overlap strangely in everyday medieval belief. A sick person may visit a shrine, drink an herbal preparation, carry a blessed token, and consult someone familiar with local remedies without finding any contradiction in the combination. If you are ill enough, theological neatness becomes less urgent than improvement. Another servant brings warmed ale. You accept a little. The cup feels good between your cold fingers. A smell of crushed rosemary rises from the rushes near the hearth whenever someone shifts a stool. The tales continue. One concerns a hunting dog that refuses to cross a bridge where a murder once occurred. Another describes a monk who dreams that a church roof will collapse and wakes the brethren before dawn. The roof, naturally, collapses the next day. A third involves a relic said to be a fragment of a famous saint's bone. The grey-haired nobleman murmurs that he once saw the same saint's finger displayed in 2 different monasteries. That produces quiet laughter. Relics are deeply important to medieval devotion, but stories about doubtful examples are hardly impossible. Churches and monasteries value sacred remains because they attract pilgrims and prestige, and people can be both devout and suspicious at once. You remember the relic mentioned earlier in the evening, the one no one quite trusts. Perhaps every castle has one. Perhaps every monastery has 3. The fire sinks lower. The stories become slower with it. The most extravagant tales now require less persuasion. Darkness helps. So does wine. So does a hall full of shadows. The white stag has already grown more convincing in your memory. When the shutters creak, you glance toward them. Only wind. Probably. The patient dog lowers its head onto your boot. Someone begins one final romance about a night lost during a storm, but before he reaches the dangerous part, a servant arrives carrying a tray of small cups, dried fruit, nuts, and something fragrant with cinnamon and cloves. The storyteller pauses. The listeners turned. Even legends apparently must make room for digestion. The tray arrives slowly through the hall, balanced in the hands of a servant who has spent enough years around noble elbows to move as though every sleeve, stool, and wandering dog has already been mapped in his mind. You smell the spices before the cups reach you. Cinnamon first, then cloves, something sweeter beneath them, perhaps honey, perhaps a little sugar if this household is wealthy enough to be generous with it. The scent drifts through smoke from the hearth and mingles with the damp rosemary crushed into the rushes beneath your boots. The white stag story is forgotten for the moment. Even supernatural mysteries struggle to compete with warm drink. Small cups are passed among the guests. The liquid inside is dark and fragrant, wine strengthened with spices and sweetening. close to what might be called hypocras in certain places and periods. Recipes vary. So do names. Some versions are carefully strained through cloth, sometimes through a special filtering bag, until the drink runs clearer and carries the perfume of expensive spices. You lift your cup. The warmth reaches your fingers before your mouth. After a long feast in a cold hall, that may be half the attraction. The wine tastes sweet, sharp, and unfamiliar. Cinnamon lingers at the back of your tongue. There is enough spice to remind you that the household can afford ingredients that have travelled enormous distances through networks of merchants, ports, tolls, warehouses, and roads before reaching this smoky room. A pinch of spice can carry half the medieval world inside it. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, and other imported flavours are valuable not merely because they improve food, but because they demonstrate access, wealth, and connection. The Lord does not need to announce that he has money. The cloves are doing it for him. Near the hearth, the elderly guest accepts his cup with both hands and takes a cautious sip. His fur-lined cloak remains drawn high around his shoulders. He seems to have reached the stage of a life where warmth is more interesting than fashion. You sympathize immediately. Beside the wine comes a shallow dish of dried figs. Another holds walnuts. There are small pieces of preserved fruit and perhaps a few costly sweetmeats prepared with honey or sugar. Sugar is still far from an ordinary household ingredient in much of medieval Europe. In wealthy circles, however, it can appear not only as food, but as something associated with medicine. That distinction between kitchen and medicine chest is often less clear than you might expect. A sweet preparation may be eaten for pleasure and praised for settling the stomach at the same time. This is convenient after a feast. Everyone can claim to be taking medicine while reaching for another piece. A noble woman beside you selects a fig with the solemnity of someone undergoing treatment. You begin to understand the system. The meal you've just survived has been substantial roasted meats, sauces, bread, perhaps pottage, fish, according to season and religious requirements, cheese, ale, wine, and enough repeated servings to make the walk from bench to hearth feel unexpectedly ambitious. Medieval ideas about digestion are shaped by inherited medical theories concerning humours, qualities such as heat and cold, and the proper balance of the body. Foods may be described as warming, cooling, moistening, drying, easy to digest, or dangerously heavy. Spices are often valued partly because they are thought to aid digestion. Whether they actually rescue everyone from an excessive dinner is another matter. No one can quite agree whether the grey-haired guest believes the cinnamon is medicinal, but he takes a second cup with admirable commitment to his health. A servant sets down another small bowl. Inside are fennel seeds. You pinch a few between your fingers. Seeds and aromatic herbs can be chewed after eating, both for the mouth and for the stomach. Fennel in particular has long associations with digestion and medicinal use. Anise and other fragrant seeds may serve similar purposes. You chew cautiously. The flavour is sharp and clean. After hours of meat, ale, smoke, and onions, your mouth is grateful for almost anything with aspirations toward freshness. Medieval dental care is not entirely non-existent. Despite what later caricatures suggest, people may clean teeth with cloth, powders, herbs, twigs, or mixtures that vary from sensible to alarmingly inventive. Some remedies for bad breath involve herbs and seeds. Others seem determined to punish the mouth for having caused the problem. You decide fennel is the safer tradition. Across the hall, a servant carries a small ceramic vessel toward one of the older nobles. The man has complained quietly of heaviness after supper, and someone has produced an herbal preparation. It smells faintly of mint. Perhaps there is sage in it as well. Households rely on a mixture of formal medical knowledge, domestic herb lore, local custom, and inherited remedies. Noble families may have access to physicians, apothecaries, monastery knowledge, or literate collections of recipes, yet ordinary household treatments remain useful. Mint, fennel, sage, rosemary, rue, and many other plants can appear in medicinal preparations. So can ingredients you would prefer not to hear about while drinking? Fortunately, nobody explains this one. Some swear that certain herbs work best when gathered at particular times, perhaps before sunrise, on a saint's day, or under conditions inherited from older traditions. Prayers may accompany treatment. A charm might be worn beside a poultice. A blessed object can coexist comfortably with a herbal drink. Even now, it is hard to tell whether every strange instruction is taken literally by everyone who repeats it. The safer approach, apparently, is to perform all of them. If the mint fails, perhaps the saint was listening. If the prayer fails, perhaps more fennel is required. Medieval medicine possesses a remarkable ability to keep everyone busy. You sit on a low bench near the fire. The patient hound from earlier has followed and now sleeps beneath it, apparently having digested his stolen scraps without cinnamon, physicians, or theological assistance. His confidence is irritating. The candles have shortened considerably. A servant uses iron fire tongs to shift a glowing piece of wood back toward the centre of the hearth. Sparks rise into the darkness beneath the rafters and vanish. The warmed wine begins to slow the room. Not silence it, simply soften it. Stories become quieter. Laughter no longer travels from one end of the hall to the other. Guests lean closer to one another. Cups are held between palms. Someone cracks a walnut with the handle of a knife and immediately attracts the disapproving gaze of a servant who clearly had other plans for that handle. Near the high table, a small dish contains candied spices or comfits, tiny luxuries associated with both hospitality and digestion. Such things can mark the transition from heavy eating into a gentler after-meal period. You take one. It is very sweet. For one dangerous moment, you consider taking 3 and calling it preventive medicine. Restraint wins. Barely. Outside, the wind strengthens. You can hear it moving around the corners of the keep and brushing against shutters fitted tightly enough to discourage weather, but not tightly enough to defeat it. Cold still slips beneath doors. A page adds another log to the hearth. The elderly guest extends his boots toward the warmth. For a little while, the noble hall feels less like a place of ceremony and more like an enormous shared refuge from winter. Wine steams gently. Figs disappear. Fennel seeds crack between teeth. The spices carried from distant lands become part of this very local comfort: cold hands, warm cups, tired stomachs, and a fire that everyone watches because no one quite wants to be the first to admit that the feast has finally caught up with them. Then the steward approaches the Lord. He is carrying a narrow roll of parchment. The Lord looks at it. His expression changes only slightly. The cup remains in his hand, but the leisurely part of the evening begins to thin. Somewhere beyond the hall waits the less romantic business of keeping an estate alive. The parchment in the steward's hand changes the mood without changing the room. The fire still glows. The cups are still warm. Someone continues cracking walnuts near the hearth. The dog beneath the bench does not care in the slightest that estate administration has arrived. But the Lord straightens. The steward waits. For several moments, nobody says anything important aloud. That silence tells you enough. Noble life after dinner is not always music, dice, and warmed wine. Once guests begin settling and the hall grows quieter, practical matters can emerge from the shadows. A household of this size cannot run on roasted meat and elegant sleeves alone. Somewhere, someone must remember which tenant owes rent, which mill needs repair, which village bridge has lost a plank, which storehouse is short of oats, and which bailiff has somehow managed to produce 3 different explanations for the same missing sack of grain. The steward unrolls the parchment. You drift nearer, not close enough to intrude, but close enough to hear the murmur of business beneath the crackle of the fire. The first concern is rent. Several tenants on one manor have paid late. Not everyone pays entirely in coin. Depending on local custom and period, obligations can include money, produce, labour, hens, grain, or other dues. The details vary enormously from estate to estate. What matters tonight is that expected income has not arrived. The Lord listens. The steward explains that autumn rains damage part of the harvest. A millstream also flooded. You imagine muddy fields beyond the castle walls, carts sinking axle-deep into lanes, grain carried beneath damp cloth, and farmers watching weather erase weeks of labour in a single miserable stretch. The hall suddenly feels warmer. Someone at the high table reaches for another cup. The steward moves to the next matter. A manor court is due to meet. Such courts can deal with local disputes, landholding customs, unpaid dues, damaged boundaries, stray animals, brewing regulations, inheritance questions, and countless small arguments that keep village life wonderfully human. One tenant accuses another of allowing pigs into his field. Another dispute concerns a hedge. The Lord rubs his forehead. You had expected noble politics to involve castles, wars, marriages, and secret alliances. Instead, a great deal of power seems to involve pigs and hedges. Medieval chronicles really should have warned you. The steward continues. A market town under the Lord's influence has collected tolls from merchants entering with cloth, salt, fish, and other goods. Market tolls can provide useful revenue, and rights connected to fairs and markets matter greatly. Traders may pay for stalls, passage, weighing, or the privilege of selling particular goods. Yet the figures recorded by the local official look suspiciously low. A clerk seated nearby produces a wax tablet. He has been taking notes. His fingertips are dark from ink, though for the moment he scratches temporary marks into wax with a stylus. The Lord asks a question. The steward answers carefully. No one can quite agree whether the official responsible is dishonest, incompetent, or simply incapable of counting beyond the number of fingers available to him. Nobody says that last possibility aloud. You suspect everyone is considering it. Another document appears. This one concerns the winter storehouses. The household needs to know what remains before the coldest months deepen. Grain, salted meat, ale, firewood, oats for horses, beans and peas, smoked fish, cheese, candles. The list seems endless because winter is long, and a noble household consumes astonishing quantities of everything. The abundance you saw at dinner depends on careful storage months earlier. Grain must remain dry. Salted food must be watched. Barrels leak. Rats require no invitation. Servants steal occasionally. So do guests, though noble vocabulary tends to become more generous when describing noble theft. A storehouse keeper has reported signs of mice near one grain bin. The steward looks particularly displeased. This apparently is serious. You think of the tiny creatures moving unseen through straw and shadows, each one dining more freely than half the villagers outside the walls. Some households keep cats partly because of such pests, although cats themselves attract layers of folklore and suspicion. In some places they are ordinary working animals. In stories they can acquire stranger associations, especially when darkness, illness, or witchcraft enters the imagination. Some swear that a black cat crossing a storehouse at night predicts loss. Others swear the only thing it predicts is fewer mice. You know which interpretation the steward prefers. He asks for another cat. Practical theology wins again. The discussion turns to a broken cartwheel. You remember seeing a cart in the outer yard earlier, tilted awkwardly beneath the shed roof. Now it becomes part of the evening. A delivery of firewood has been delayed because the wheel split on the forest track. The carpenter says the axle also needs work. A messenger has already been sent to a nearby village for seasoned timber. The Lord sighs. The dog wakes briefly, hears nothing about beef, and goes back to sleep. A dispute follows concerning grazing rights along a river meadow. Then a question about whether a tenant's son can inherit a holding after his father's death. Then another about repairs to the mill. Then whether enough fodder remains for horses if snow lasts into late spring. Estate management is less like commanding a kingdom and more like trying to keep hundreds of small problems from becoming one large catastrophe. The steward knows this. So does the Lord. So do the clerks. Behind every tournament, feast, embroidered hanging, fur-lined cloak, and polished cup lies an enormous web of rents, labour, harvests, animals, roads, mills, timber, law, and storage. Power looks magnificent from the high table. From the steward's parchment, it looks like accounting. A servant adds wood to the fire. The iron fire tongs scrape softly against stone. The discussion becomes quieter. One matter involves a widow whose rent is in arrears after illness struck her household. The steward suggests postponement. The Lord agrees, perhaps from mercy, perhaps because an empty holding produces even less rent. Medieval decisions are rarely made from one motive alone. Another case concerns a man accused of cutting timber where he has no right to do so. Woodland matters. Trees provide fuel, building material, fencing, tools, and pasture resources. Rights to cut wood can be carefully controlled. Some swear that certain old trees should never be cut because spirits or misfortune cling to them. The steward does not mention spirits. He mentions fines. You suspect fines are more reliable. The parchment gradually rolls closed. Not every problem is solved. Several are merely assigned to tomorrow. That may be the truest form of administration in any century. The Lord reaches again for his spiced wine. His shoulders loosen. The steward gathers the documents. Yet before he can leave, a messenger standing near the far doorway catches his attention. The man wears a travel-stained cloak. Mud has dried almost white around his boots. He carries a sealed letter. The steward sees it. Then the Lord sees it. And you understand that the evening's business is about to become something more delicate than pigs, grain, and broken wheels. The sealed letter does not travel directly into the Lord's hand. First the steward receives it. He turns it once beneath the candlelight, studying the wax without breaking it. The messenger remains several paces away, shoulders damp beneath his travel-stained cloak, while cold air follows him through the doorway and spreads briefly across the rush-covered floor. You feel it around your boots. Wet wool, horse sweat. Mud, outside. The courtyard is nearly black except for the orange breathing of watchfires and the occasional movement of a torch beneath the gatehouse arch. Inside, everyone suddenly seems less interested in walnuts. The steward examines the seal. A crest has been pressed deeply into dark wax. Seals matter because written messages travel through a world where handwriting alone does not prove identity. A recognizable seal can confirm that a document comes from the person whose authority it claims to carry. Rings, matrices, cords, wax colors, and carefully preserved impressions become part of the language of power. Breaking another person's seal without permission is therefore not the sort of experiment you undertake because the evening feels slow. The Lord gestures. The letter is opened. He reads only the first lines before rising. That movement is enough. The steward follows. So do two senior household men, the grey-haired noble with the pilgrim badge, and another guest who has spent most of the evening appearing far too relaxed to be unimportant. They withdraw toward the side of the hall. You drift after them at a respectful distance. The oak door closes. It is thick enough to keep out winter draughts, most servants, and at least half of an inconvenient conversation. Unfortunately, medieval doors have not yet perfected the art of defeating human curiosity. You settle near the wall. The chamber beyond is smaller than the great hall, warmed by a narrow hearth and lit with several beeswax candles. A tapestry hangs against one stone wall, helping soften both the cold and the echo. A table stands beneath it with a writing box, sand shaker, folded parchment, and an iron key large enough to suggest that whatever it opens is either valuable or very determined not to be opened. The letter concerns a neighbouring noble household. More precisely, it concerns a marriage. The name of a young heiress is mentioned, then the name of a widowed lord, then several estates. That is when you begin to understand that nobody is speaking about romance. Among medieval nobles, marriage can bind families, settle disputes, concentrate land, produce heirs, strengthen claims, repair alliances, and occasionally create new problems so elaborate that future generations require entire chronicles to explain them. Affection may exist. Sometimes it even grows. But land has arrived at the meeting first. One man points toward the letter. The heiress controls property through inheritance rights connected to her late father. Her marriage could redirect influence across several manors and place strategic roads, rents, woodland, and river access under a new network of family loyalties. A marriage bed can quietly rearrange a map. This is not especially poetic. It is, however, extremely medieval. The Lord listens while the grey-haired noble explains the relationships. A cousin, a half-brother, a maternal uncle, someone's second wife, a niece promised years ago and never married. You try to follow. Within minutes, the family tree begins to resemble a hedge neglected since the Norman conquest. The men appear to understand it, or at least they nod confidently enough. The discussion turns toward inheritance. Without a secure heir, noble estates can become contested. Claims pass through bloodlines, marriage contracts, custom, royal grants, local law, and agreements made years earlier between people who inconveniently fail to predict every possible death, remarriage, or quarrel. No one can quite agree whether the neighbouring widower wants the marriage primarily for land, political protection, or access to the heiress's influential relatives. Nobody suggests that he simply admires her conversation. The messenger is finally invited closer. He reports that he left the neighbouring manor 2 days earlier. The roads were terrible. A stream had risen over one crossing. His horse lost a shoe. He slept one night at a monastery guest house and another beneath the roof of a manor servant who charged him enough for supper to make Christian charity seem negotiable. You recognize the rhythm of medieval travel immediately. Distance is measured not only in miles but in mud, rivers, horses, tolls, weather, and whether someone remembers to leave the gate open. The messenger also carries news. News is often as valuable as the letter itself. A baron farther north has fallen ill. A disputed boundary case may be carried before a higher authority. A noble family once thought supportive of the proposed marriage now appears hesitant. And one visiting knight has spent several days at another lord's household. That last detail creates a silence. Apparently, where a knight sleeps can become politics. You glance toward the door. The patient dog from the great hall has somehow followed you and now lies just outside it, chin between his paws. He may be the only creature in the castle not involved in an alliance. For now, political gossip after dinner is rarely shouted across a hall. It lives in smaller rooms, near embers, beneath low voices. A rumour can damage a marriage negotiation. A careless remark can reveal weakness. A visiting messenger may be carrying one message openly and another in memory. People therefore learn to speak indirectly. One noble wonders whether a certain family is experiencing financial difficulty. He does not say they are poor. He observes that their hospitality has become modest. Everyone understands. Another mentions that their horses looked thin last autumn. This is apparently also evidence. You make a quiet note never to allow medieval nobles to inspect your stable. They can apparently calculate your political future from a pony's ribs. The conversation moves toward favours owed. A lord who provided military support may expect assistance later. A family that helped secure a church appointment might anticipate another kindness. Hospitality itself creates relationships. Gifts matter. Patronage matters. Being remembered matters. Nothing is written in a neat ledger labelled favours. Everyone nevertheless appears to maintain one inside the head. The grey-haired noble touches the pilgrim badge at his belt while speaking of the proposed marriage. Then he produces a small ring engraved with a religious symbol. Some people believe blessed rings, charms, or devotional objects can protect travellers, strengthen oaths, or guard against misfortune. Rings can also carry personal and political meaning, acting as gifts or tokens of allegiance. Some swear that an oath taken upon a holy relic carries a special terror for anyone considering breaking it. Others point out more quietly that history contains no shortage of people willing to take the risk. Even now, it is hard to tell whether sacred objects make promises stronger or merely make betrayal feel more elaborate. The Lord finally decides not to answer tonight. That is itself a decision. A reply written too quickly might suggest eagerness. A delayed reply might suggest hesitation. A carefully timed reply suggests dignity, or indecision. The distinction is often available only to the person composing the chronicle afterward. The messenger is given ale and permission to sleep inside the outer household, rather than return immediately to the road. His letter remains on the table. A clerk places a small weight upon it so the parchment will not curl near the hearth. The men relax slightly. The conversation becomes less formal but no less revealing. One marriage leads to another. One inheritance dispute leads to a story about a cousin who claimed a manor through his grandmother. A favour owed becomes a grievance remembered. By now the candles are half burned. The castle around you has grown quieter. Yet beneath fur-lined cloaks and behind heavy oak doors, the noble world continues shifting by whispers. Then, from somewhere deeper in the keep, a bell sounds. Not the distant abbey bell this time. A smaller household bell. Several heads lift. Even politics must eventually yield to prayer. The smaller bell sounds again. Its note is thinner than the great abbey bells that travel across fields and river mist, but inside the keep it carries clearly through stone passages and timber galleries. Conversation fades almost at once. The sealed letter remains on the table. The marriage proposal remains unanswered. The complicated family tree, which has already caused you enough suffering for one evening, is abandoned beside the hearth as though everyone has silently agreed that salvation may be easier to understand than inheritance. The Lord rises. Others follow. You pull your wool cloak closer and join them as the company leaves the smaller chamber. The patient dog stands as well. For several hopeful steps, he seems prepared to attend prayers. A servant points firmly back toward the hall. The dog considers this theological restriction, sighs, and settles beside the door. You continue without him. The castle corridors feel different now. During the feast, servants hurried along them carrying platters, jugs, towels, baskets, and firewood. Now movement is slower. Torch flames lean in the draughts. Shadows gather beneath staircases. Somewhere below, an iron key turns in a storehouse lock. Your boots scrape softly against worn stone. The smell of food fades behind you. Ahead comes wax, cold masonry, and faint incense. The household chapel is not enormous. It does not need to be. A great noble residence may possess a private chapel where members of the household hear mass, attend prayers, keep devotional objects, and mark the religious rhythm of daily life without always travelling to a parish church or monastery. You duck through an oak doorway. Inside, the ceiling rises into darkness above a modest altar. Several beeswax candles burn there, their flame steadier than the smoky torchlight outside. Painted saints look down from panels along the wall, their colours softened by years of soot and candle smoke. A small lamp glows near the altar. Everyone arranges themselves according to rank almost automatically. Even prayer has seating politics. The Lord and his family move nearer the front. Senior household members take familiar places. Servants remain farther back or along the sides. You find space near a cold pillar. Your knees immediately begin to regret the decision. Medieval devotion is woven tightly into the hours of the day. Monasteries structure time around regular offices, and lay households may follow simpler rhythms of prayer shaped by church bells, saints' days, feast days, fasting seasons, and familiar prayers before sleep. Tonight, after food, games, stories, estate accounts, and politics, the household turns towards something quieter. A chaplain steps forward. His robe moves softly against the floor. The prayers begin. You understand less than everyone around you, but the rhythm matters almost as much as the words. Responses come low and practiced. Heads bow. Fingers move across crosses and beads. Nearby, a noblewoman holds a string of prayer beads. Such devotional beads take many forms before the later standardized rosary becomes universal. People count prayers, meditate upon sacred subjects, and use repeated devotion as part of daily spiritual discipline. Her thumb moves bead by bead. Slowly, almost sleepily, you find yourself breathing in time with it. On the altar stands a small reliquary. It is silvered, perhaps gilded at the edges, and shaped like a tiny shrine. Inside, according to household tradition, rests a fragment connected to a saint. Whether it truly does is another question. You remember the grey-haired noble joking earlier about seeing what seemed to be the same saint's finger in two different monasteries. Here, however, he does not joke. He bows with everyone else. Relics occupy a complicated place in medieval devotion. They may be understood as physical links to holy people and sacred history, and possession of an important relic can bring prestige to a church, monastery, or noble household. Pilgrims travel long distances to stand near them. People seek healing beside them. Oaths may be sworn upon them. Some relics acquire stories of miracles, protection, or extraordinary survival. No one can quite agree whether every relic deserves the confidence placed in it, but skepticism about one object does not necessarily weaken belief in sacred power itself. The distinction feels perfectly natural here. You can distrust one finger and still respect saints in general. The chaplain moves through the prayers. Outside the chapel, the wind pushes faintly against the keep. Inside, candles barely tremble. A servant near the rear makes the sign of the cross more carefully than the nobles ahead of him. Perhaps he is simply devout. Perhaps he's heard the white stag story. Darkness changes people. Night is associated with practical dangers, certainly thieves, fire, illness, unstable roads, but also with dreams, temptations, wandering spirits, sudden death, and the uncertainty of waking again. Before sleep, prayer provides order. A noble household might pray for protection, forgiveness, health, departed relatives, travellers on the road, children, pregnancies, political success, or souls in purgatory. The concerns are spiritual. They're also intensely practical. Medieval people are quite comfortable asking heaven to assist with things that sound suspiciously like household management. The chaplain reads from a small book. Its pages catch the candlelight. Books of hours and other devotional manuscripts can become prized possessions among wealthy lay people, richly decorated with painted initials, tiny saints, vines, beasts, flowers, and gold leaf. A fine manuscript is both a tool of devotion and an object of status. One rests tonight in the hand of the Lord's wife. Its cover is worn smooth at the corners. A silk marker hangs between the pages. She knows exactly where to open it. You realize that an expensive object can still be genuinely used. Not everything valuable is merely displayed. The prayer continues toward protection during the night. This is where older fears and newer devotions meet. Some people keep crosses near the bed. Others place blessed candles, saintly images, written prayers, or holy water within reach. Certain household traditions attach meaning to the direction of sleep, the dreams experienced on particular nights, or the signs heard after darkness. Some swear that sleeping with a prayer beneath the pillow prevents nightmares. Others insist that certain herbs placed nearby protect against troubling dreams. A sprig of rosemary, perhaps. A little mugwort. A blessed token. A scrap of parchment bearing sacred words. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these habits are devotion, medicine, folklore, or all three layered together. The medieval world rarely bothers to separate them as cleanly as you might. The grey-haired noble touches his pilgrim badge again. Perhaps habit. Perhaps reassurance. Perhaps his knees hurt. You're becoming increasingly convinced that half of medieval piety is conducted while kneeling on surfaces specifically designed to test faith. At last, the final responses soften into silence. No one rushes away. For a few breaths, the household remains still. The smell of beeswax and incense rests in the air. The unresolved letter seems very far away now. So do the dice. So does the feast. A candle near the reliquary gives a tiny flicker. Then people begin to rise. The Lord leaves first. The noble women gather their skirts and cloaks. Servants move toward the doors. The chaplain remains near the altar, adjusting one candle and covering the manuscript he has used. You step back into the corridor. The cold finds you immediately. Farther along the passage, several women turn toward the private chambers of the keep instead of returning to the great hall. One carries an embroidery frame. Another holds a small covered basket. A third has tucked the devotional book against a chest. Their candles move away through the darkness. You follow the warm glow. You follow the moving candles away from the chapel. Their light travels ahead of you in small golden pools, sliding over stone walls, oak doors, iron hinges, and the edges of hanging cloth. The noise of the great hall has almost disappeared now. Behind you, a servant closes the chapel door. Ahead, the women of the household continue deeper into the private chambers, carrying embroidery, devotional books, covered baskets, and the tired composure of people whose evening duties have not quite ended. The corridor turns. A door opens. Warmth reaches you first. The chamber beyond is smaller than the great hall and far easier to heat. A fire burns beneath a modest stone hood, and thick wall hangings help keep the cold from pressing too sharply through the masonry. Candles stand on a wooden chest and beside a carved chair. Rushes cover the floor here as well, but they smell fresher, mixed with dried herbs that release a faint scent whenever someone crosses the room. You step inside. This is a more private world. Not entirely private, of course. Privacy in a noble household is a flexible concept. Servants come and go, ladies in waiting remain nearby. Relatives share chambers, children, attendants, clerks, nurses, and household women may all pass through spaces that modern people might imagine as personal. A noble woman is rarely alone unless everyone else has become very inefficient. One of the women places the embroidery frame from the hall beside the fire. Another sets down the small covered basket. Its contents are practical rather than mysterious thread. Needles, a small knife, scraps of linen, ribbons, and several little packets of dried herbs. A younger woman removes her outer mantle and gives it to an attendant. Beneath it, her gown is still warm from the crowded chapel. The fur lining of the mantle is brushed carefully before being folded. Fine clothing demands attention. Wool, linen, fur, silk, embroidery, decorative braid, and costly dyes represent wealth that cannot simply be thrown into a corner because the owner is tired. Garments are aired. Spots are brushed. Loose stitching is noticed. Sleeves may be repaired before a tear grows larger. Even noble wardrobes depend upon patient hands. You settle near the hearth while one woman resumes her needlework. She's finishing a narrow band of embroidery that may become part of a garment or household textile. Fine needlework is not merely an idle amusement. Noble women can supervise substantial textile production, organize household clothing, commission work, distribute cloth, and manage the labor required to keep a large household dressed. A chest against the wall contains folded linen. Another holds wool blankets. Iron keys hang from the belt of the senior lady responsible for much of the chamber's management. Keys matter. They signify access. A woman trusted with storehouse chests, linen cupboards, spice boxes, valuables, or household supplies may carry visible responsibility at her waist. The keys clink softly as she sits. You begin to understand that noble women do not simply withdraw from public life after dinner. They shift into another kind of work. Conversation moves toward the household. A servant has complained of swollen hands after washing linen in cold water. Someone suggests a salve made with animal fat and herbs. Another recommends keeping the hands wrapped in wool near the fire. A third insists that calendula or comfrey should be added, depending on what the herb garden still has stored from summer. Domestic medicine often rests in women's hands, especially within the household. Recipes for ointments, infusions, poultices, syrups, and washes pass through written collections and oral memory. Some remedies are sensible. Some are strange. Some combine both categories with admirable confidence. A small jar is opened. It smells of wax, fat, and rosemary. No one can quite agree whether rosemary truly helps the servant's cracked skin, but everyone agrees that doing nothing seems less useful. The jar is sent downstairs. The senior lady then asks about candles. Not prayer candles. Household candles. A maid reports that the chamber supply is lower than expected. Beeswax is reserved carefully, particularly where cleaner light is preferred. Cheaper tallow candles serve many ordinary needs, though their smell can be unpleasant and their smoke more noticeable. The lady makes a note on a small wax tablet. Even after dinner, someone is counting wax. The romance of castle life survives another blow. A young woman beside the fire has begun combing her hair. An attendant works slowly through the long strands with a carved comb, separating tangles before braiding them for the night. Combs may be made from wood, bone, antler, ivory, or other materials depending on wealth. Hair care has practical importance. It also provides an opportunity for inspection. Lice are not impressed by rank. Fine linen and embroidered sleeves do not persuade them to respect social hierarchy. The attendant checks carefully. You decide that this may be the most democratic institution in the castle. Another woman opens the devotional book carried from the chapel. Its illuminated page glows in candlelight. She reads quietly while the others continue their work. Prayer and household routine sit easily beside one another here. A woman can discuss linen inventories, examine a child's sore throat, arrange embroidery, and turn a page toward a saint's image without feeling that she has changed subjects. The covered basket yields another object. A small cloth packet filled with dried lavender and perhaps other aromatic herbs. It is intended for a chest or bedding. Herbs help freshen enclosed spaces and may be credited with protective or medicinal properties as well. Some swear that certain plants placed beneath a pillow encourage peaceful sleep or guard against troubling dreams. Others avoid herbs associated with unlucky traditions or dangerous folklore. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which plant attracts good dreams and which one invites precisely the dreams you are trying to avoid. The safest strategy seems to be owning several saints' medals as backup. Conversation shifts again. A daughter of a neighbouring household may visit before spring. Beds must be prepared. Suitable attendants assigned. Clothing aired. A chamber cleared. Hospitality among nobles carries political weight, and domestic preparation becomes part of that larger world of alliances and reputation. The women know exactly who outranks whom. They know who dislikes draughts. They know who expects better wine. They know which guest travels with too many servants. This information may be more useful than half the parchment discussed in the Lord's chamber earlier. A messenger can tell you who is negotiating a marriage. A lady of the household can tell you who will complain about the blankets. Never underestimate operational intelligence. The fire settles lower. An attendant uses iron tongs to move a coal. A servant arrives with warmed water in a small jug, then leaves again. One woman washes her hands and face with a cloth. Another rubs a little scented preparation into dry skin. The room grows quieter. Embroidery is folded away. The devotional book closes. The iron keys remain at the senior lady's belt. Outside the chamber, the castle continues its slow descent toward night. You can hear distant footsteps, a door closing, perhaps the faint scrape of a bench being moved in the hall. The women are not yet ready for bed. but the public evening's over for them. Now there are household instructions to remember, herbs to send downstairs, garments to inspect, family concerns to discuss, and small preparations to make before sleep. Then, from the corridor beyond, comes a low burst of laughter. Male voices. The men have not withdrawn yet. They are still near the great hearth, where hunting dogs, cooling cups, and stories of tomorrow's sport are keeping another corner of the castle awake. The laughter from the corridor leads you back toward the great hall. By now the room looks almost nothing like the place where supper began. Most of the long tables are gone. Benches have been shifted toward the walls. The rush-covered floor lies open beneath the rafters, marked here and there by dark patches where ale or sauce soaked through during the feast. The musicians have disappeared. The dice are packed away. Only a few candles remain burning beyond the main hearth, and their light barely reaches the farther corners. The men who linger have gathered close to the fire. Some sit on stools. Others stand with cups in hand. A pair of hunting dogs occupies the warmest stretch of floor as confidently as any duke. You recognize the patient hound from dinner among them. He has apparently completed his theological studies and returned to practical matters. A nobleman stretches one boot toward the embers. Another removes his gloves and rubs his hands together. Conversation has turned to hunting. It begins with a deer seen 3 mornings earlier near the edge of the Lord's woodland. The animal, someone claims, is unusually large. Naturally, no animal described after dinner is ever ordinary. The stag has a magnificent rack of antlers, according to one man, 12 points. Another says 14. A third swears it has 16. You glance toward the dog. He appears unwilling to participate in the inflation. Hunting among nobles is far more than a way of obtaining meat. It is sport, social ritual, training, display, and a visible expression of rights over land and game. Certain forests and hunting grounds are governed by regulations that restrict who may take particular animals. A lord's deer are not simply deer. They are deer with administrative protection. You suspect the animals themselves have not been informed. The men discuss where the stag was last seen. A forester reportedly found tracks near a frozen stream. Another servant discovered browsed branches farther north. Tomorrow, if weather allows, a small party may ride out after dawn. The conversation becomes suddenly technical. Wind direction, hounds, tracks, the condition of the ground, whether overnight frost will make the trail easier to follow. One of the older men argues that snow is coming. His knee aches. This, apparently, is meteorological evidence. Weather beliefs surround medieval life because weather matters intensely to nearly everything: harvests, roads, ships, livestock, hunting, and travel. People watch clouds, animal behavior, wind, stars, moon phases, and countless inherited signs. Some swear that pain in an old wound predicts rain. Others watch the way smoke rises from a chimney. No one can quite agree whether the nobleman's knee knows more about tomorrow than the steward. The nobleman's knee, however, has a long record of self-confidence. A servant brings in one of the hunting horns used by the household. Not for playing now. A leather strap has split. The lord's huntsman sits near the hearth and examines it while the others continue talking. He turns the horn over in his hands, checks the fitting, and calls for a length of thong from a small work basket. Here again, noble leisure depends upon maintenance. Leather cracks, buckles loosen, bowstrings wear, saddles split. Hawk equipment needs repair. A hunt that looks effortless from a distance is held together by servants, craftsmen, animal handlers, foresters, beaters, stable workers, and a heroic amount of stitching. The horn strap is repaired beside you while one nobleman shifts the conversation from deer to hawks. Now everyone has an opinion. A peregrine flown too high last week. A goshawk that struck poorly. A bird that refused to return promptly to the glove. Falconry carries prestige because trained birds require skill, patience, food, specialized equipment, and constant attention. Hoods, jesses, bells, gloves, perches, and careful feeding all belong to the practice. A falconer can spend extraordinary effort persuading a creature with wings to remember that it is technically employed. The men debate one bird's temperament as though discussing an unreliable relative. One insists she is merely spirited. Another calls her stubborn. The falconer, who has remained quiet until now, observes that the bird performs well whenever everyone else stops interfering. Silence follows. Then the lord laughs. The falconer survives. Near the wall, weapons hang on pegs and rests. A younger knight moves toward them and lifts a sword still in its scabbard. He is not preparing for battle. He is checking the leather. The belt fitting has begun to loosen. Another man examines the edge of a hunting knife beneath candlelight. Routine care matters. Metal must be cleaned and protected against rust. Leather needs oiling and repair. Wooden shafts split. Bows respond badly to damp. The glamorous objects of noble life require almost as much attention as the noble people carrying them. A servant produces an oily cloth. The knife blade is wiped carefully. You smell metal, smoke, leather, and rendered fat. Someone nearby begins discussing boar hunting. This is where the boasting worsens. A boar encountered several years ago has apparently grown larger with each retelling. Tonight it is nearly the size of a cart. By winter's end, you suspect it will be collecting market tolls. The grey-haired noble with the pilgrim badge describes a hunt in which a horse threw its rider into a hedge. He claims the rider emerged without injury but with a branch caught inside his hood. The others laugh quietly. Even aristocratic dignity has limits when shrubbery becomes involved. The conversation drifts from hunting into estate concerns again, but more casually than before. A fence near the game preserve needs repair. Poachers may have been active near the southern wood. The forester wants another man assigned to patrol during the coming week. Poaching is not merely about stealing food. Hunting rights can be deeply tied to lordship, legal privilege, and control over resources. Someone mentions finding a snare. The lord's expression hardens. Then another man says the snare may have been intended for rabbits rather than deer. The expression softens slightly. Even now, it is hard to tell whether every trap discovered in a noble woodland represents desperate hunger, ordinary rule-breaking, or simply a gamekeeper eager to demonstrate that his employment is necessary. The fire cracks. One of the dogs begins dreaming. Its paws twitch against the rushes. Perhaps it is chasing the 16-point stag. Perhaps it has more realistic ambitions involving kitchen scraps. The men settle deeper into their seats. Cups are nearly empty now. The earlier political caution has faded into familiar conversation hunting horses, damaged tack, poor weather, unreliable birds, timber, fences, and whose hound has the best nose. These are not trivial subjects to them. Hunting connects land, wealth, identity, masculine reputation, hospitality, and the rhythms of the estate. Tomorrow's ride is already taking shape beside the embers. A huntsman will rise before dawn. Grooms will prepare horses. Dogs will be fed and gathered. Someone will curse the frost. Someone else will discover that a strap repaired tonight needs repairing again. For now, however, nobody moves. The hall is warm enough. The dogs are asleep. The last log has collapsed inward, glowing red around its edges. Then a clerk appears at the doorway carrying a writing case beneath one arm. The Lord notices him. Tomorrow's hunt can wait. There are letters that must leave before sunrise. The clerk waits at the doorway until the Lord gives a small nod. Then he enters with the writing case tucked carefully beneath his arm. The object is plain compared with the silver cups and embroidered hangings that have surrounded you all evening, but everyone nearby understands its importance. Inside are the tools that allow tonight's decisions to travel beyond these stone walls: parchment, ink, quills, sealing wax, perhaps a small knife for trimming feathers and scraping mistakes, and the quiet patience required to turn spoken instructions into words another household can trust. The hunting conversation dissolves. One nobleman drains the last of his cup. Another stretches, glances toward the corridor, and decides that letters are considerably less interesting than sleep. A few remain. You follow the lord and clerk toward a smaller table near the wall, where 2 beeswax candles provide steady light. The clerk sets down his case. The lid opens. Inside, everything has its place. A small horn or ceramic container holds ink. Several quills lie wrapped in cloth. There is a piece of pumice for smoothing parchment, a narrow knife, sealing wax, and a little container of fine sand or powder used to help dry fresh writing. You watch the clerk choose a quill. It has already been cut, but the nib needs attention. He takes the small knife and trims it with practiced movements. This is the sort of detail no romance ever mentions. Knights cross mountains. Lords negotiate marriages. Kings issue commands. Meanwhile, someone must keep sharpening feathers. The clerk tests the nib on a scrap. Satisfied, he draws a sheet of parchment closer. The lord begins to dictate. The first letter is ordinary. Almost disappointingly so. It concerns timber. A nearby estate official is instructed to arrange delivery of seasoned wood for repairs to the broken cart and several outbuildings before the weather worsens. The lord specifies quantities, then stops. The steward corrects one figure. The lord changes it. The clerk waits without expression. Writing by hand encourages a useful habit of deciding what you mean before forcing another person to copy it beautifully. You suspect modern meetings could benefit from the same threat. The second letter concerns market tolls. The figures discussed earlier still trouble the steward. An official is to review the accounts and send a clearer record. The clerk writes steadily, dipping the quill into ink every few lines. His fingers are stained dark around the nails. Ink can be made in different ways, including mixtures based on oak galls, iron compounds, soot, or other materials. Good ink matters because important records may need to remain readable for generations. A poorly written letter can cause confusion. A poorly made ink can cause confusion more slowly. The distinction is mainly one of patience. The lord pauses while the clerk sands the first section. Outside, wind moves softly along the wall. One of the hunting dogs follows you into the corner and settles nearby, apparently convinced that correspondence cannot possibly be more dangerous than politics. The third letter is more delicate. It concerns the marriage proposal delivered earlier. The lord does not answer yes. He doesn't answer no. Instead, he dictates several carefully respectful sentences acknowledging the message, praising the neighbouring household, and expressing willingness to continue discussions at an appropriate time. It is the written equivalent of opening a door 3 inches. The grey-haired noble listens. The steward suggests one phrase should be softened. Another man recommends removing a word that might imply too much enthusiasm. The clerk scratches out the offending term carefully with his knife, smooths the surface, and writes over the correction. Parchment is valuable. You do not throw away an entire sheet because one adjective behaved badly. The debate continues. No one can quite agree whether the final wording sounds gracious, cautious, or suspiciously cautious. The Lord decides that this is probably ideal. The letter is left to dry. Another message must go to a monastery. This one concerns a request for prayers on behalf of an ill relative and perhaps a small gift that will accompany the message. Noble families maintain relationships with religious houses for devotion, burial, education, hospitality, patronage, and memory. A monastery may pray for the living and dead associated with a family. It may also provide a safe place for a tired messenger who has spent all day discovering that medieval roads are primarily mud connected by puddles. The clerk records the instructions. A saint's feast is mentioned. The date matters. Time is often reckoned through church calendars, feast days, regnal years, local customs, and familiar religious markers rather than the neat numerical habits you expect. The clerk consults a small calendar. Red letters mark important holy days. Certain dates carry additional beliefs. Some swear that beginning a journey on particular feast days brings protection. Others avoid days thought unlucky for travel, bloodletting, marriage, or major decisions. Even now, it is hard to tell whether a lord delays departure because of piety, superstition, weather, or simply because his horse is lame. Usually several reasons are available. The final letter tonight is for a rider leaving at dawn. It carries instructions to a distant manor regarding grain stores, repairs, and the arrival of a visiting relative. The messenger will need a fresh horse if possible. He may carry a sealed packet and verbal instructions that never appear on parchment at all. Written letters are important, but messengers themselves can supply tone, explanation, gossip, and clarification. A trusted rider is therefore more than a delivery service. He is a moving extension of the household. The clerk finishes. Now comes the seal. Wax is warmed carefully near a candle flame, softened, and placed where the folded parchment must remain closed. The Lord produces his seal matrix. It presses into the wax. For a moment, everyone waits. Then it lifts. The impression is clear. That small shape transforms folded parchment into something carrying authority. The letters are arranged in order. One for the estate official, one for the market accounts, one for the neighbouring noble, one for the monastery, one for the dawn rider. The steward checks them again. You imagine their journeys beginning while the castle still sleeps through frost-covered fields, over muddy bridges, beneath roadside shrines, past villages where chimney smoke rises before sunrise. Some will arrive quickly. Others may be delayed by rain, swollen rivers, injured horses, toll gates, or hospitality that proves a little too hospitable. One might be lost entirely. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how many medieval messages disappear between sender and destination. Considering the roads, perhaps the miracle is that any arrive at all. The clerk cleans his quill. He wipes the knife. The writing case closes. Its little iron clasp clicks into place. The Lord finally rises from the table. The candles have burned low enough that wax has gathered in pale ridges around their bases. The hunting dogs are asleep. The hall is almost silent. Yet beyond its walls, servants are still moving. Someone must prepare the letters for the riders. Someone must wake the stable hands. Someone must bank the hearths, secure the food, carry water, gather dirty vessels, and turn this exhausted castle into a household ready for another dawn. As the clerk leaves with the sealed messages, you follow the faint sound of footsteps toward the servants who are quietly rebuilding the night behind everyone else. The footsteps lead you away from the Lord's writing table and back toward the working heart of the household. Here, the castle is not settling into sleep so much as being prepared for it. The distinction becomes obvious almost immediately. A servant passes carrying 2 empty jugs. Another follows with a wooden bucket of water that sloshes dangerously close to the rim each time he turns a corner. Somewhere farther ahead, a broom scratches across stone. From the kitchen comes the dull clang of a pot being shifted away from the embers. The nobles may believe the evening is ending. For the servants, it has simply changed jobs. You return to the great hall. It looks exhausted. The last guests have gone. Only a few household officers remain, speaking quietly near the door before withdrawing. The hunting dogs have finally surrendered their territory beside the hearth, though the patient hound that has followed you all evening remains curled beneath one bench, as though he has received permanent tenancy. Rushes lie crushed and darkened underfoot. Breadcrumbs cling to them. A broken walnut shell rests beside a stool. Several drops of candle wax have hardened on one of the trestles. The hall has hosted a feast, music, games, legends, estate business, politics, and half the accumulated conversation of a noble household. Now someone has to clean it. 2 servants begin gathering the worst of the rushes with broad wooden rakes. Rush-covered floors can be refreshed rather than entirely replaced every night, but dirty material must eventually be removed. Food scraps, mud, ash, spilled drink, animal hair, and the less dignified evidence of crowded indoor life all settle into the floor covering. Fresh herbs may be scattered among new rushes for scent. Tonight, however, the priority is simpler. Remove anything likely to smell worse by morning. A servant finds half a piece of bread beneath the bench. The hound opens one eye. The bread disappears. The eye closes again. Efficiency takes many forms. Near the hearth, another worker uses iron tongs to rearrange the fire. He is not putting it out. A household needs heat through the night, but an unattended blaze is dangerous. Fires are banked carefully, reducing open flame while preserving hot coals beneath ash so that morning servants can revive them without beginning entirely from cold tinder. Fire is comfort. Fire is cooking. Fire is also one of the greatest threats to a structure filled with timber beams, straw, rushes, cloth hangings, wooden furniture, and people who insist upon carrying naked flames through dark corridors. The servant pushes embers inward. Ash folds over their glow. The roaring hearth becomes a breathing red mound. Some swear that a fire which suddenly sparks after midnight predicts visitors. Others treat it as evidence that damp wood has been added badly. No one can quite agree whether the old servant banking this hearth believes such signs, though he pauses when a spark leaps unexpectedly toward the stones. He looks at it, then at the wood, then adds more ash. Apparently tomorrow's visitors can wait. You move toward the service passage. The kitchen is still warm enough to make the cold corridor behind you feel distant. Several pots have been scraped. Bones and useful leftovers have been separated from scraps meant for animals. Remaining meat is covered or moved into cooler storage. Bread is counted. A wheel of cheese is wrapped again. Waste is watched carefully. Yesterday's feast can become tomorrow's pottage. Bones can strengthen broth. Fat can be saved. Stale bread can thicken dishes. A household that appears extravagant at table can become surprisingly practical once the guests stop looking. A kitchen servant carries a basket toward the pantry. Another secures a wooden chest with an iron lock. The key turns heavily. Food theft is not an abstract concern in a large household. Neither is spoilage, vermin, damp, or servants taking what they believe nobody will miss. The steward's earlier worries about mice suddenly seem less ridiculous. You hear scratching somewhere behind a barrel. A kitchen cat appears from beneath a bench. It freezes. You freeze. The scratching stops. The cat disappears into shadow with the solemn purpose of a knight entering battle. There will be no illuminated manuscript about this campaign. That seems unfair. Farther along, chamber servants prepare sleeping rooms. You follow one carrying folded wool blankets. A noble bedchamber requires more preparation than simply finding an empty mattress and hoping for the best. Beds are straightened. Curtains checked. Linen aired. Blankets folded. Braziers or hearths may be tended. Water is placed nearby. Candles are prepared. Chamber pots are emptied or positioned discreetly where they can later ruin someone's dignity in darkness. One servant arrives carrying a long-handled warming pan. Its metal container holds hot coals or embers, and it is passed carefully between sheets to take the worst chill from the bed. This is particularly welcome in winter. It is also the sort of object that reminds you how many medieval comforts involve putting fire unusually close to cloth. You watch the servant move it skillfully. He knows exactly how long to leave it in one place. You do not. This is why you're observing rather than volunteering. The sheets rise with faint warmth. Another attendant checks the mattress. Beds might contain straw, wool, feathers, or combinations depending upon wealth and circumstance. Fine noble beds can be substantial pieces of furniture, surrounded by hangings that offer warmth, status, and a degree of privacy. The linen receives a small cloth sachet filled with herbs. Lavender, perhaps. Maybe rosemary. You remember the women discussing such packets earlier. Some swear that aromatic herbs placed among bedding discourage insects, sweeten the room, encourage calm sleep, or protect against unpleasant dreams. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the servant adds the sachet because the lady believes in its protective power, or because everyone prefers lavender to damp wool. Both reasons seem adequate. Down another stairway, servants carry away used vessels. Water is precious because someone must fetch it. Buckets travel from wells or cisterns. Jugs travel upward. Dirty water travels downward. Nothing appears by magic. Every basin in a noble chamber represents somebody's arms and several flights of stairs. You begin to understand why medieval castles contain so many people whose job descriptions can be summarized as carrying heavy things for someone who's already upstairs. A boy old enough for household service but clearly trying not to fall asleep carries a bundle of firewood toward a chamber. He pauses beneath the weight. An older servant takes half without speaking. They continue together. The castle is held together by gestures like this as much as by stone. In the hall, another group has begun stacking benches neatly against the wall. Tomorrow the space may serve a different purpose. Petitions, meals, visitors, household business, perhaps more entertainment. The flexibility of the great hall requires constant rearrangement. Furniture moves because life moves. The rushes are smoothed. A damaged stool is set aside for repair. A cracked cup is removed. One servant finds the half-burned beeswax candle from the high table and carefully saves what remains. Wax is valuable. Even a noble household does not discard good light casually. The stub will burn again, perhaps tomorrow night, perhaps in a chamber, perhaps beside another sealed letter. You follow its faint honeyed scent as the servant carries it away. Outside, the wind has quieted. Inside, the castle grows cleaner, darker, and more orderly with every tired step. The nobles have finished their evening. The servants are finishing the consequences. Soon the food will be secure, the fires banked, the beds warmed, the water placed, the floors cleared, and the great hall restored enough to begin again. But before anyone can sleep, the outer doors must be checked. Iron keys are already moving through the corridors. And somewhere near the gatehouse, the night watch is taking over. The iron keys reach the outer passage before you do. You hear them first, striking one another at the belt of a household officer as he walks through the narrowing corridor toward the gatehouse. Their sound is heavy and unmistakable, very different from the soft clink of the lady's chamber keys you heard earlier. These open larger things. Doors, stores, yard gates, perhaps the sort of chest nobody wishes to discuss casually after supper. You follow the sound. The half-burned candle rescued from the great hall travels ahead in the hand of a servant. Its flame is small now, surrounded by a thick rim of honey-coloured wax, but nobody wastes what remains. The light throws the servant's shadow across the stone until he appears briefly 3 times taller than any ordinary man. That seems appropriate for this hour. Night makes everything larger. The corridor slopes downward. Cold strengthens with every step. Warm chambers and banked hearths remain behind you, while ahead comes the smell of damp stone, wet timber, horse breath, and the faint smoke of the watchfires outside. A thick oak door waits at the end. The officer checks its iron fittings. He pushes once against the timber, then again, only after satisfying himself that it will remain exactly where several craftsmen intended does he lift the key. The lock answers with a deep metal scrape. Securing a noble household after dark is not a single dramatic moment. It is a sequence of small checks repeated every evening. Doors are barred. Storerooms locked. Courtyard entrances controlled. Stable areas inspected. Kitchen fires watched. Valuable objects secured. People account for who is inside and, just as importantly, who is still outside. A castle may look immensely strong from a distant road, but everyone within knows that stone walls are useful only if somebody remembers to close the door. This is less heroic than defending battlements. It is also required considerably more often. You step into the gatehouse. 2 watchmen stand near a brazier. One pulls his cloak tighter around his shoulders while the other holds his hands above the coals. Their clothing is practical wool rather than courtly finery. A hood protects one man's head from the draught that moves continuously through the archway. Beyond them, the outer yard lies under darkness. A watchfire burns beside the wall. Another glows farther along the parapet. The sky above is clear enough for stars, though mist still hangs low beyond the gate where the road falls toward the river. The watch changes quietly. Names are exchanged. Instructions repeated. A rider is expected before dawn to carry the letters prepared earlier. The messenger who arrived tonight sleeps somewhere inside the outer household. No other visitors are expected. The gate is to remain closed unless there is good reason to open it. Good reason, you notice, is being defined by men who would very much prefer not to leave the brazier. You cannot blame them. The winter air bites your fingers within moments. One watchman carries a horn. Another has a spear. The purpose is not constant battle readiness so much as vigilance. Thieves, fire, wandering strangers, escaped animals, disorder in the yard, and any unusual movement beyond the walls can all require attention. Watch duties vary enormously between castles, towns, and households, but darkness brings practical uncertainty everywhere. A man approaching after the gate is shut may have to shout his identity. If nobody recognizes his voice, the night becomes awkward. You look through the opening toward the road. Nothing moves. Then a distant shape appears beside the hedge. The younger watchman stiffens. You do too. The shape moves again. 4 legs. A tail! A stray dog trots through the mist and disappears behind a shed. The watchman pretends he was never concerned. You respectfully pretend the same. Night watch seems to depend heavily upon mutual generosity. The officer continues his inspection. You follow upward now, climbing a narrow stair within the thickness of the wall. The steps are uneven from generations of boots. Your hand slides along cold stone as you rise. At the top, wind finds every gap in your cloak. Below, the castle roofs form black shapes around the courtyard. Chimney smoke drifts slowly. A stable lantern glows near one doorway where a groom finishes checking the horses. You remember their breath steaming in the opening moments of the evening. They are still here. So are you. Far beyond the walls, a monastery bell sounds. The note crosses the fields and fades. A watchman murmurs a prayer under his breath. Night and religion remain close companions. Certain hours carry particular devotional associations, but ordinary people also bring personal habits into the darkness. A man may cross himself after hearing an owl. Another may whisper a saint's name before walking an exposed stretch of wall. Some swear that a sudden cry from certain birds predicts death or misfortune. Others believe particular lights seen across marshland signal wandering spirits. No one can quite agree whether every watchman truly believes such things, especially when boasting beside a daytime fire. At midnight on a lonely wall, people become less philosophical. The older guard points toward a distant flicker beyond the river. You stare. It appears, vanishes, appears again. Perhaps a traveller's lantern. Perhaps a cottage fire seen through mist. Perhaps something less ordinary, if one prefers stories to explanations. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what such lights mean. You remember the white stag. This is not helping. The guard shrugs and returns to the brazier. Apparently unexplained lights are easier to tolerate when they remain on somebody else's land. You descend into another corridor. The officer checks a side door leading towards storerooms. Locked. Another near the kitchen. Barred. A final iron key closes a small room containing household valuables and documents. The keyring grows quieter with each completed task. Inside the residential passage, servants have reduced the lighting. Only occasional candles and rushlights remain. Between them lie stretches of shadow. Your footsteps sound louder now. Tapestries move faintly in drafts. An oak door creaks somewhere ahead. Nothing emerges. You tell yourself this is reassuring. Medieval households carry countless beliefs concerning nighttime dangers that are neither thieves nor fire. Bad dreams may be blamed on food, illness, spiritual temptation, evil influence, or supernatural forces. People keep crosses, prayers, relics, herbs, blessed candles, and protective objects near sleeping places. Some place iron near entrances because iron itself gathers protective associations in folklore. Horseshoes, knives, and keys, and other iron objects may acquire significance beyond their ordinary purpose. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the great key hanging beside this passage is here for protection or simply because someone forgot to put it away. You decide it can do both. A servant passes carrying a covered candle. He wishes you good night with a nod and vanishes around the turn. For several moments, you are alone. The castle feels enormous when most of its people stop moving. You hear the banked fire behind one door, a cough behind another. wood settling somewhere above, wind brushing the shutters. The sounds are small, ordinary, and somehow stranger because you cannot see their source. Then the patient hound appears from the darkness. He walks directly toward you, sniffs your hand, and continues down the passage. Your dignity survives by a narrow margin. The dog has now mistaken you for suspicious activity twice in one night. At the far end, another door is secured. The officer tests the bar. Satisfied, he turns back. His work is nearly finished. The watchmen remain awake. The gate remains closed. The fires are banked. The valuable rooms are locked. The castle has drawn itself inward. Now only the private chambers remain fully alive. Beyond one oak door, a warming pan is being lifted from linen. A servant carries folded night clothes. Another brings a final basin of warm water. You follow their candlelight toward the noble bedchamber, where the evening is at last preparing to become sleep. The warming pan comes out of the bed just as you reach the chamber door. A servant lifts it carefully by the long wooden handle, and for a moment the perforated metal lid glows faintly in the candlelight. Warmth rises from the linen where it has passed beneath the covers. The servant checks the sheets with one hand, satisfied that they are no longer carrying the full enthusiasm of a winter stone wall, then carries the pan toward the hearth. You step inside. After the corridors, the chamber feels almost luxurious. Almost. The walls are still cold enough to remind you that you're sleeping inside a fortress rather than a pleasant country inn. A fire burns low in the hearth. Thick hangings cover part of the masonry. Beeswax candles stand near the bed and on a chest beside the wall, giving the room a warmer, cleaner light than the smoky rushlights elsewhere in the castle. At the centre stands the great bed. It is substantial enough to look less like furniture and more like a small building. Heavy curtains hang from the frame. They can be drawn around the sleeper to trap warmth, soften draughts, create privacy, and make the sleeping space feel smaller inside a chamber that may contain attendants, family members, or servants. You touch one curtain. The fabric is thick. No medieval noble wishes to spend money on carved bedsteads, dyed cloth, fur-lined cloaks, and imported spices only to lose the final battle against a draught. A chamber servant places folded nightclothes on a stool. The lord has arrived behind you, accompanied by attendants who begin the slow business of removing the layers that have carried him through the evening. A belt comes first, then an outer garment. A fur-lined robe is lifted carefully from his shoulders and handed away rather than dropped. Fine clothing is expensive, and servants inspect it even now. One notices mud dried along the lower edge from an earlier crossing of the courtyard. Another checks a fastening that has loosened. Tomorrow it will be cleaned and repaired. The lord stands nearer the fire while shoes are removed. His feet, you suspect, are grateful. Your own boots have spent the entire evening collecting enough mud, ash, rush fragments, and dog hair to qualify as an archaeological site. An attendant brings a basin. Warm water is poured from a jug. The lord washes his hands and face with a cloth. Full bathing practices vary enormously across medieval Europe and through the centuries, but washing parts of the body, especially hands and face, belongs comfortably to household routine. Wealth allows warm water to be carried upstairs, which is a luxury mostly because someone downstairs has just carried a heavy vessel all the way up here. You have seen enough servants tonight to understand the real definition of noble comfort. It is having another person climb the stairs. Beside the basin sits a small container of scented water or herbal preparation. Rosemary and perhaps lavender rise faintly from it. An attendant offers a cloth. The lord wipes his hands again. Nearby, Another servant prepares the bed. The linen is straightened. A wool blanket is pulled smooth. A fur covering is folded near the foot. A small pillow is adjusted within the curtains. Beds can be significant displays of wealth. Fine linen, feather bedding, embroidered hangings, carved frames, and costly fabrics all make the noble bedchamber a place of status as well as sleep. The bed may even travel in pieces with an important household. Apparently, medieval aristocracy is willing to move almost anything except its expectations. The lord crosses toward a chest. The large iron key from his belt opens it. Inside lie documents, money, perhaps jewellery or other portable valuables. Tonight's seal matrix is placed carefully inside. So is a small purse. The chest closes. The key turns. Valuables are secured before sleep because walls and guards do not abolish theft. A busy household contains servants, visitors, travellers, relatives, clerks, messengers, and enough locked boxes to suggest that universal trust has not yet been invented. You glance toward the door. The patient hound has appeared again. He settles just outside the threshold. Perhaps he is security. Perhaps he smells the dried meat someone carried through here yesterday. No one can quite agree whether dogs sleeping near chambers are valued more for companionship, warning, warmth, or the remarkable ability to occupy exactly the part of the floor where a sleepy person intends to walk. The Lord kneels briefly near the bedside. A small devotional image hangs nearby. Beside it rest a cross and a short string of prayer beads. The evening prayers in the chapel were communal. These are quieter. Before sleep, people may repeat familiar prayers, ask protection through the night, commend themselves to saints, or remember the dead. Night remains uncertain. A person goes to sleep without assuming morning as casually as you might. Illness can arrive quickly. Fires can start. A messenger can bring terrible news before dawn. Prayer makes the transition into darkness feel ordered. The Lord crosses himself. An attendant quietly mirrors the gesture. On a small table near the bed lies another object, a folded scrap of parchment marked with sacred words. Perhaps it contains a prayer. Perhaps a protective text. Written charms and devotional inscriptions sometimes blur the boundary between accepted religious practice and folk belief. Certain words may be carried on the body, placed near a bed, or kept among belongings in hopes of protection. Some swear that particular prayers prevent nightmares. Others insist that a holy name written 3 times and kept near the sleeper guards against sudden harm. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the parchment beside this bed is treated as formal devotion or as something closer to a charm. The Lord seems unconcerned with classification. If it helps, it stays. The household has also placed a small bundle of herbs near the pillow. You recognize rosemary. Perhaps there is lavender too. Earlier you saw similar herbs in the women's chamber. Certain plants are associated with freshness, sleep, healing, memory, or protection. Their exact meanings vary by region and tradition, and household practice can mix practical use with inherited belief. A fragrant herb sweetens stale air. If it also frightens away a nightmare, nobody is likely to complain. An older attendant produces a tiny jar. The Lord rubs one knee. Perhaps the hunt stories have inspired the joint to remember every horse he has ever ridden. The jar contains a salve. Its smell suggests fat, beeswax, and herbs. He applies a small amount. Medieval noble households may have access to physicians and trained practitioners, yet everyday aches are often treated with familiar domestic remedies, salves, warmed cloths, herbs, poultices, rest, prayer, or whichever combination an experienced servant recommends with sufficient confidence. Leeches are available for other complaints. Mercifully, nobody suggests them tonight. Your bedtime mood survives. The curtains are drawn, partly closed. A chamber servant checks the hearth one final time and places a screen carefully before it. Another trims the bedside candle. The flame becomes smaller. The Lord climbs beneath the blankets. He is not necessarily alone in the chamber, depending on rank, circumstance, and household arrangement. Attendants may sleep nearby. A trusted servant might rest on a pallet. Family members sometimes share sleeping spaces. Privacy is relative and warmth is valuable. A small truckle or pallet lies near the wall for one attendant. He folds a coarse wool blanket across it. The difference between master and servant remains visible even in sleep. Feather bed at the centre, pallet near the wall. One room, two very different experiences of winter. The final cup of water is placed beside the bed. A chamber pot waits discreetly beneath furniture. You admire the discretion. You also admire the courage required to find it in darkness. The candle is lowered again. Outside, the monastery bell sounds faintly across the fields. You remember hearing that bell while the feast still filled the hall? So much has happened since then without anyone leaving the castle music. Dice, white stags, spices, rents, marriages, prayers, hunting stories, letters, keys, and dozens of servants quietly carrying the night forward. Now the half-burned candle gives one small tremble. The dog outside turns once before lying down. The attendant pulls his blanket higher. The oak door closes almost completely. Beyond it, watchmen still move along the walls. Embers still glow in the great hearth. Somewhere below, a clerk's sealed letters wait for dawn. But here, behind the heavy bed curtains, the noble evening has finally reached its last quiet task. Sleep. The oak door settles into its frame with barely a sound. You remain in the passage for a moment, listening. Behind the door, the noble bedchamber has become almost still. The Lord lies behind heavy curtains. The attendant on the pallet near the wall has drawn his wool blanket to his chin. The little bundle of rosemary remains beside the bed. The protective scrap of parchment lies within reach, and the final candle burns with a flame small enough to make every shadow seem larger than the object casting it. The patient hound rests outside the chamber. He opens one eye when you move. Apparently you have become part of his night watch. Then he lowers his head again. You continue slowly along the corridor. The castle has changed more completely than at any other point tonight. Hours ago, the great hall blazed with fire and conversation. Platters crossed beneath soot-black rafters. Cups filled and emptied. Musicians tuned strings. Dice struck wood. Nobles leaned over chess pieces while servants navigated the rush-covered floor with the quiet desperation of people trying not to spill hot sauce on important clothing. Now those same passages hold mostly darkness. A rushlight burns in a wall bracket near the stairs. Its flame is narrow and weak. You pass it carefully. The cold stone steps descend beneath your feet, worn hollow along the centre by generations of servants, guards, guests, children, priests, messengers, nobles, and people whose names no household account ever bothered to preserve. Below, the great hall waits. You enter through the side passage. The transformation is complete. No music. No dice. No estate accounts. The tables have been stacked away. The damaged stool found by the servant stands alone near the wall, waiting for tomorrow's repair. Freshened rushes lie beneath your boots, though faint traces of rosemary, spilled ale, smoke, and supper still linger in the air. The great hearth is banked beneath grey ash. A narrow red glow survives between the coals. The half-burned beeswax candle from the high table is gone, saved carefully for another evening. Nothing useful is wasted. Even darkness must be managed economically. You walk toward the hearth and extend your hands. There's still enough heat to reach your fingers. Somewhere above, timber settles with a low creak. The sound travels through the rafters. You look upward automatically. Nothing moves. Some swear that a house making strange noises after midnight is warning its inhabitants of trouble. Others understand the old timber contracts, shifts, dries, and complains whenever the temperature changes. No one can quite agree whether the servants sleeping nearby prefer the practical explanation. You certainly do. A tiny movement passes near the pantry entrance. The kitchen cat appears. It pauses in the edge of the ember glow with something of the confidence of a creature whose working day begins precisely when everyone else would prefer not to see what it is doing. The mouse problem mentioned by the steward has apparently entered the night shift. The cat disappears. One administrator replaces another. You leave the hall and step toward the courtyard. The door opens only far enough to let you through. Cold air folds around you immediately. Frost has formed on the stones. Your breath becomes pale mist. Across the yard, the stable is mostly dark, but a small lantern remains near the door. Horses shift quietly inside. One stamps a hoof against the floor. Another exhales heavily, the warm breath visible through a gap. The rider who will carry the sealed letters before dawn is still asleep. His horse is not yet saddled. For a little while longer, politics itself is resting. Above you, the walls rise black against the winter sky. A watchfire glows along the parapet. One guard moves past it with his cloak wrapped tightly around him. His footsteps are slow and regular. He reaches the corner tower, pauses, looks across the fields, then continues. You follow the line of his gaze. Beyond the walls, the world is darker still. Fields lie under frost. The river is invisible beneath mist. Somewhere farther away stands the monastery, whose bells have accompanied the entire evening. You cannot see its walls. Then the bell sounds. One deep note. Another. The sound travels across the sleeping land. It reaches farms where families lie beneath coarse wool blankets. It reaches roadside inns where travellers sleep beside packs and muddy boots. It reaches monks rising or keeping the rhythm of the night offices. It reaches this castle, slipping over battlements and through shutters as easily as wind. Time moves forward, not by clocks glowing beside beds, by bells, by fires burning lower, by candles shortening, by guards changing watch, by the knowledge that dawn is always approaching even when nobody can yet see it. You cross the courtyard. Near the gatehouse, the two watchmen remain beside their brazier. The younger one is fighting sleep. His head dips once, then rises. The older guard notices. He says nothing. Perhaps generosity is strongest between men assigned to remain awake together in the cold. A wooden cup sits near the brazier. Probably ale. Probably cold now. The younger guard rubs his hands and looks toward the gate. Nothing is there. No rider. No stranger. No white stag. This is almost disappointing. After tonight's stories, you half expect the mysterious animal to appear beneath the archway carrying a marriage contract and demanding market tolls. Fortunately, medieval folklore has standards. The wind stirs the watchfire. Sparks rise and vanish. A guard crosses himself almost absent-mindedly. Perhaps he remembers some old warning about the deepest part of night. There are traditions concerning dreams, spirits, omens, strange cries, and unlucky hours. Certain nights of the year are considered more dangerous than others. Certain saints are invoked for protection. Blessed candles may be kept for storms, sickness, childbirth, or fear. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the guard fears anything supernatural tonight. What he definitely fears is falling asleep while his superior is awake. Some threats require no folklore. You leave them at the brazier. Inside again, warmth slowly returns to your hands. A servant sleeps on a pallet near an inner doorway. His boots remain beside him. He will need them soon. Before sunrise, kitchen fires must be revived. Water must be carried. Bread prepared. Horses groomed. Letters given to riders. The noble household will awaken and begin producing another day from the remains of this one. The feast that seemed so important only hours ago has already become yesterday's work. You climb the stairs one final time. Doors remain shut along the passage. Behind one, noblewomen sleep among embroidered hangings and herb-scented linen. Behind another, a clerk probably dreams in handwriting. Behind another, someone turns beneath blankets and causes a bed frame to creak. The patient hound is still outside the Lord's chamber. This time he does not open his eyes. You stop beside him. His breathing is slow. In, out, in, out. The candle inside the chamber has nearly vanished. A thin line of light shows beneath the oak door. Then even that becomes dimmer. The castle does not truly sleep all at once. It settles by degrees. One voice ends. One footstep fades. One ember darkens. One guard takes another man's place. And gradually the enormous household that spent the evening eating, listening, gambling, negotiating, praying, repairing, writing, washing, locking, and preparing becomes quiet enough that you can hear the wind moving gently around the old stone. And now the night becomes softer. You no longer need to follow anyone. There are no more letters to seal, no more doors to lock, no more cups to carry from the hall. The servants have done what they can. The watchmen keep their distant fires. The horses stand quietly in the dark stable, warm beneath their blankets of breath and shadow. You can remain here beside the sleeping hound. The stone beneath you is cold, but somewhere behind the door a banked fire still gives off a little heat. The scent of rosemary lingers faintly in the passage. Far below, the great hearth holds a final red coal beneath its covering of ash. The monastery bell has fallen silent. For a while, nothing answers it. The river lies beneath mist. The forest road is empty. The market stalls beyond the walls are closed and dark. No merchant calls out prices. No cartwheel grinds through mud. No pilgrim badge flashes beneath daylight. Even the roadside shrines stand quietly beneath frost, keeping their small watch over travellers who will not appear until morning. Your breathing slows with the castle. The heavy doors remain secure. The walls stand around you. Whatever tomorrow brings can remain beyond them for now. The marriage letter can wait. The broken wheel can wait. The stag in the forest can wait. Even the suspicious relic, wherever someone has locked it away, can manage without your attention until daylight. The candle shrinks to a blue-edged flame. Then smaller. The hound gives one sleepy sigh. You let the darkness gather without resisting it. Stone fades. Timber fades. The last warmth of the hearth fades into the soft weight of blankets, distant bells, and quiet winter air. And somewhere beyond the walls, dawn is still hours away. For now, there's only this old castle, this sleeping household, and the long, gentle silence of the medieval night.